Think forward. Think Research Channel.
The opinions expressed in the following program are strictly those of the speaker. They do not necessarily reflect the views of the National Science Foundation.
From the National Science Foundation, where discoveries begin. This is Frontier, discussions of today's most exciting research subjects by distinguished scientists and engineers working at the frontiers of knowledge.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here and see so many friends, and it was wonderful working with Joan and Roger Bybee. Great, as you'll hear, a great learning experience for me. The whole enterprise of 12 years of being president of the National Academies was a real education, and I'll tell you some of the things I learned. So this is the National Academies, a new name we gave it when I was there. It used to be called the Academy Complex, which sounded like a disease. What did I learn? I think most importantly that science is more important for all societies than most people think, including most scientists. And if we're going to be able to make its importance effectively shown and employed, we have to change not only society's appreciation and understanding of science, but we also have to change the attitudes of scientists regarding their responsibility. So I will only talk about the United States, or at least I'll focus on the United States. So with regard to us, it's clear that the world is rapidly changing. I view ourselves like a winning football team. You get ahead, you're very complacent, and that's the best way to have a disaster. We need to wake up. Other nations are increasingly developing an outstanding capacity in science and technology. Their numbers of science engineers vastly outnumber ours. At least they will in the future. U.S. industries recognize this. Recent survey by the Council of Competitiveness showed that about twice as many, something like twice as many companies would go first to China for the research and development than to the United States. These are American companies. So things are happening here that we haven't been really thinking about carefully. And of course, we've been relying on these outstanding international students who've come here and fueled our science and technology enterprise, started businesses and everything. And that's part of our complacency. But as you know, they're now starting to return to positions in their home nations, which is good for their nations, and of course, not good for us. Here I am in the Great Hall of the People, incredible event in 2003, honoring the, I think, the 20th anniversary or so of the Third World Academy of Sciences, and they had this huge meeting with something like 4,000 people, mostly, as far as I could tell, a lot of young students, in the Great Hall of the People, and this incredible podium with all these dignitaries. I'm sitting next to the Minister for Science and several other people, Mayor of Shanghai. What was impressive about this was that President Hu Jintao not only came to give a speech to all these people about science and its importance for their nation, but he also stayed and listened to some other people's speeches about science. I can't imagine an American president doing that, unfortunately. Of course, the difference is that the leaders of China are all engineers, or mostly engineers, and our leadership has yet to get the message. So how can the U.S. hope to remain a world leader in science and technology throughout this century? Obviously, the only option is to be the continual source of the most innovative new ideas and technology, and we need, therefore, to focus much more intensely on stimulating and rewarding innovation and risk-taking. And I would claim that this is not going to happen automatically. Like every society, we have a lot of inertia and self-interest taking us in the wrong direction. So what I call active management and creative leadership will therefore be needed from the scientific community. Some evidence for my claim. This is something I've been harping on for now 20 years and nothing's changed. The outmoded pre-med requirements in the United States that distort most undergraduate science curricula, drive a lot of people out of science. Half of the Harvard students, these very talented students, highly selected, who enter every year, who declare when they come there that they'd like to be science majors, half of those people for the last 20 years have been changing majors. You could figure out why. So the undergraduate science curricula is dominated by the fact that pre-meds are covering their grounds, and they don't know. Like me, I was that way. I didn't know I wanted to be a scientist or a doctor. So we have this requirement for an entire year of organic chemistry, but no requirement for cellular molecular biology or biochemistry. This reflects the status of science maybe 40 years ago. And it stays the way it is because of faculty and not student needs. It's totally destructive for students. That is, faculty in chemistry departments like this. They get a lot of FTEs, but it's not effective for our future scientific enterprise. Something I'll spend more time on is the disappearance of the independent young investigator, at least in the biomedical sciences where I work, and I'm in the middle of that right now at UCSF. So that everybody knows these consequences. We're discouraging many of our best young people from pursuing independent research careers because it takes so long to actually get to be independent. The kind of thing that I and my colleagues experienced where we had our own research grants at age 28, this doesn't happen anymore. And second of all, and I think maybe even more importantly, too many new investigators are pursuing well-worn paths due to the training inertia that's generated by their long postdoctoral periods as apprentices. And I have a little diagram to illustrate that. So time starts in the center, goes outwards, and the pie chart shows our expanding scientific enterprise. And the fact that you trained with Mike Bishop, and you've had Mike Bishop may have had I'm not picking on him in particular, just any successful scientist may have had 30 or 50 or 60 students and postdocs, or even 100, and the system rewards continuing on in the same direction. Preliminary results are required for getting grants. Obviously, you're going to continue to do what your advisor did, or more or less, try to expand on that, and that means a lot of people competing in a small space. It's not pleasant to be a scientist if you're just publishing 2 weeks before somebody else. And it also means that somebody who writes a cell biology textbook every 5 years, there's a lot of unexplored experimental space, at least in biology, that nobody's using modern methods on. And so this is a very inefficient system. So to stimulate innovation, it's important to recognize how new knowledge arises. And those of us who are scientists, including myself before I came to the Academy, never had time to think about it. But when we came to the Academy, it was 1993 I came to the Academy, and this is President Clinton. And there was a trial balloon floated, I think out of the Vice President's office or someplace. Some of you will remember this. All science should justify itself, the funding of science, by what it was going to lead to in the end. Yes, we should be able to predict, to fund science, we should be able to predict what it was going to be useful for. That led to a major effort at the Academy, and just the first thing we did was to produce these series of 20 pamphlets called Beyond Discovery, The Path from Research to Human Benefit. And the whole point of these was to analyze, looking backwards, how fundamental knowledge in unexpected ways has produced very important benefits for human beings. The first one we did was on the global positioning system. Every one of these pamphlets are still up on the web, and they're terrific, actually. I mean, we need to keep on reissuing them. Had a centerfold, and the centerfold was this chronology of selected events. And this particular one is from the left hand of the centerfold for the global positioning system. And as you could see, maybe we started this story with the physicist's invention of atomic clocks, able to keep time to 1 part per billion, which everybody thought was a wonderful scientific finding and won a Nobel Prize, but totally useless. But it turns out by combining that knowledge in completely unpredictable ways with other knowledge, and this continues on the next slide, the global positioning system was born, and that's why I could find my way around in my car without looking at a map, and it's got many, many important uses, as you know. And so each pamphlet took one of these and traced backwards, and it made the point over and over again that we could look backwards, but we can't look forwards because we can't predict how knowledge will be combined. It's too complex. So this reminds me of a wonderful quote I found by Henri Poincaré, the famous mathematician: "The source of creativity in science. To create consists precisely in not making useless combinations and in making those which are useful and which are only a small minority. Invention is discernment, choice. Among chosen combinations, the most fertile will often be those formed of elements drawn from domains which are far apart." That's the important point here. The true work of the inventor consists in choosing among these combinations so as to eliminate the useless ones, which of course are the vast majority. So the fundamental reason for the explosive growth of science is easily explained, because the more knowledge you have, the more combinatorial possibilities you have for making new inventions and new discoveries. For example, 100 units of knowledge can be combined in 100 times more ways than can 10 units of knowledge. It goes up as n squared. It's most obvious in the sense that, at least in my field, it's led to the old knowledge has led to all kinds of new methods that greatly speed up the pace of discovery, and that's just one way in which is obvious. But there's a catch, of course. As knowledge grows, it becomes increasingly difficult to find the right combinations. You're just surrounded by this huge amount of stuff. Nobody can keep track of it. So how do we work on that problem? I would claim we need to think about how we set up institutions and structure them to maximize innovation. I am a great believer in small laboratories with an independent PI. In general, we should encourage our institutions to support a set of laboratories of modest size. Here I said 9 to 12 people maximum, each headed by an outstanding, innovative, independent investigator. When I got to UCSF, Howard Hughes had just sort of decided they were going to take our best scientists in biomedical sciences and double the size of their groups. And I saw that as extremely destructive, actually. And I think most of those people ended up being less creative than they were before they got their groups doubled. And the reason is obvious. You're so busy taking care of your, quote, business, unquote, you don't have time to collide with other people. Your group becomes a self-contained entity, and new ideas are hard to come by. It's like a big battleship that can't be steered. Of course, these small laboratories I'm advocating, should be clustered, embedded in a cooperative culture in which techniques and equipment are freely shared. We focus on that extensively at UCSF. And most importantly, everything must be done to encourage a random collision of people and ideas. How we structure our buildings is important. You could always tell what's a good scientific environment by looking at the lab space, a place where everybody comes in, goes to the end of the hall, and there's a lab, and nobody sees them for them or anybody else in their lab until they go home. That's not going to be a productive environment. You need a building where, in order to go to the bathroom, you have to interact with everybody else. In fact, UCSF, we've structured it so my office is, first of all, small, and it's clustered with 4 other small offices from 3 different departments. In order to get to the men's room, I have to walk by all the students sitting in the little lunchroom, study room, right in front of the hall that leads out. And so, and the labs are all open, and there's no reserved space, so everybody's running into each other all the time. Okay. I have some specific worries about the NIH, which I've been most concerned. I haven't been that much involved with NSF funding mechanisms, and I've been on several panels for the NIH, most recently this one that made a report to Zerhouni about peer review. I think we have an incentive system there for institutions that will continually lead to overexpansion. We've doubled the amount of building, mostly built on soft money expectations since the announced doubling of the NIH budget. Second of all, we have a peer review system that both entitles specific fields and approaches, and that disadvantages critical basic research, including work with model organisms, which is where many of the breakthroughs are going to come for human disease. And finally, I think we've encouraged very, very large laboratories. If you look at part of this peer review study was giving us some information about how much money the NIH was awarding to individual PIs in total from all their grants. And I and the other people on the panel was astounded to see the very large amounts of money. Something like 78% of the total funds of the NIH are going to investigators who have more than $400,000 a year. And that just doesn't cut it for me. This is not going to create the kind of system we want. So this is how I got, I was a scientist happily in my lab, and like most other scientists, ignoring everything about science policy until I wrote this editorial at UCSF in 1985, Limits to Growth in Biology, Small Science is Good Science, and made a lot of arguments that I think are still valid today, but which are largely ignored, not only in the United States, but China's making the same mistakes. We could all do a lot better. So March 1st of this year, I started a new career as editor of science. I'm much too old for any new jobs, and actually I was called by the search firm or something, and I said, I thought they were crazy, but apparently they couldn't find any young people willing to do this job. But it does give me a new platform for old ideas, and this is an issue about career paths for scientists and the need to spread people from our scientific community into many different occupations so that they could bring their skills and connect to us if we're going to actually have effective scientifically based societies. So I want to spend the rest of the time on science education for everyone. There are three ambitious goals, I would say, for science education for all Americans. First of all, to enable all children to acquire the problem-solving, thinking, and communication skills of scientists so that they can be productive and competitive in the new world economy. The fact is that people in the industry know what they want, but they don't understand how science education could get it for them, and it's not really their fault. It's because of the way we teach science often, and I'll explain that. The second goal would be to create what Prime Minister Nehru called in India a scientific temper for our nation. And I think his understanding of what science and the scientific temper could do for a nation like India, incredibly diverse, like the United States, in creating the rationality and the tolerance essential for a democratic society. That recognition is still incredibly valid today and very important for our country. I call it immunizing people against talk radio. Basically simplistic answers that drive us in the wrong direction. And finally, of course, to help the United States generate new scientific knowledge and technology by casting the widest possible net for talent. There's all these very talented people who never have a chance to show their talent, don't even know that science exists, and we need to harvest that talent. So this is what occupied, from 1993 to 1995, I spent half of my time on this. This was an incredible effort, supported by the NSF and the Department of Ed. We had 18,000 reviewers for this report. The review process took a year. We normally have maybe 18 reviewers at most, so we're off by a factor of 1,000 here. But this was a great education. I think the most important thing it did beyond the document was to create an appreciation in different communities that we need to work together on this. The scientists got to recognize, there were 40 members of the Academy, by the way, worked on this. The scientists got to recognize that we don't know everything about education, that we need to interact with the best teachers and science educators. And I think the science educators got to appreciate that scientists could be useful. As many of you know, in the post-Sputnik years, there was a great resentment that scientists had taken over education, and it led to a split between science educators and scientists. We discovered that inquiry, which is one of the fundamental emphases in the standards, was not understood by teachers or by people. And so we published a series of supplements, including this very important one, about what inquiry really is. Of course, you all know that this is the way science should look in school. The teacher is a coach. The kids are very actively learning throughout the entire time, and a lot of commotion. Here's what some 5-year-olds do in San Francisco. At one point, this was part of the standard curriculum. This is kindergarten now. Put on clean white socks and walk around the schoolyard. In class, collect all the black specks that are stuck to the socks and try to classify them, which ones are seeds and which ones are dirt. Now, this is the teacher's coach, so they say, well, they have no idea. But well, there's a little microscope they each have, and they're supposed to draw each speck. And after they do that, then they're supposed to notice something. And without the teacher telling them, eventually the 5-year-olds will come with, there's these regularly shaped ones, and maybe those are seeds. And then, again, the teacher has to press them to come up with an idea how they would test their idea that the regular shaped ones are seeds. And they end up by planting them, of course. And so this is for 5-year-olds. I mean, these are kids who can't read or anything. They can do the essence of science here. And this is the kind of thing which can be done in schools, but sadly is not done enough. So the vision is this. Let's imagine an education that includes solving hundreds of such challenges over the course of the 13 years of schooling. These challenges, of course, is increase in difficulties as children age. We have this curriculum already. It's been developed in several places. The United States is a leader in developing that curriculum. In fact, it's being used all over the world now, and I think very soon will be used more outside the United States than inside the United States. I believe that children who are prepared for life in this way would be great problem solvers in the workplace, with the abilities and the can-do attitude that are needed to be competitive in the global economy. And even more important, they will also be more rational human beings, people who are able to make wise judgments for their family, their community, and their nation. So this is the update of the National Science Education Standards called Taking Science to School. It was a major effort, again, bringing together educators, scientists, science education specialists. We had learned something in the last 10 years, and this is the popular version interpreted for teachers and parents and others. And of course, the web was invented when it's hard to imagine. I came in the Academy in 1993, there was no World Wide Web. In 1994, all of a sudden this thing came. This is an incredible blessing for the Academy. We have been publishing all these books, and they're going to dusty libraries. And now they're available everywhere around the world. I run into people in the Philippines who are using this thing on arsenic to do their environmental work. It's basically the web is a great source for scientific advice from everywhere, and we need to use it better. I've circled here the education subdivision, which had something like 150 different reports on it. So some of the good news is that the world is waking up to this. Particularly scientists around the world are working together through an organization called the Inter-Academy Panel of some 100 academies to spread inquiry-based science education. And there are major programs underway in France. I think about a third of the country now is doing hands-on elementary science, driven initially by the French Academy of Sciences, Sweden, Chile, Mexico, China, Australia, and so on. This is a map of the countries. All the colored ones are countries with academies in the Inter-Academy Panel. The colors don't mean anything. What means something is the white areas. And you see that we have a ways to go in Africa, and there's an active effort through the Inter-Academy Panel, which is centered in Trieste, to form new academies, and they are forming new academies throughout Africa. So this is a long-term project to both strengthen science everywhere and spread science education and scientific ways of thinking. So the dream is that children's science education can help impart scientific values to the world. This is one of my favorite quotes from this wonderful book that's still in print by Jacob Bernowski called Science and Human Values. The Society of Scientists is simple because it has a directing purpose to explore the truth. Nevertheless, it has to solve the problem of every society, which is to find a compromise between the individual and the group. It must encourage the single scientist to be independent and the body of scientists to be tolerant. From these basic conditions which form the prime values, there follows step by step a range of values: dissent, freedom of thought and speech, justice, honor, human dignity, and self-respect. So if we think about science in this way, it would help us to think about how we teach science. The promise of world science collaboration is really the fact that scientists everywhere have the same problems with their governments and their societies. And we can talk to each other because we have a common set of values and a common set of evidence-based analyses. And we all feel that our governments do short-term things that are foolish and don't take long-term views. This is evidence of this cohesion. This is a planning meeting for setting up these international organizations, the Inter-Academy Panel and now the Inter-Academy Council. The meeting was in Switzerland. Here we are at 7 o'clock in the morning. Look at the cups. This is a Swiss McDonald's. And I only took this is only about a third of the presidents who were in the room. I couldn't get them all in the picture, but this is the presidents of the Chinese, Japanese, Swedish, and Indian Academies of Science. The bad news, I think most of you know this, most science education in the United States is not like the science education that I've been talking about. I have examples. It's easy to get examples, and we laugh at these things, but actually we should be crying. My field is cell biology. The cell is the basic unit of life. Middle school students should come in contact with real cells, watch videos, learn how amazing they are, as well as how they work in general, but instead, they don't learn any of that, really. We fill their heads with all the names of their parts and their processes, which don't have any meaning, turn kids off of science. And I don't, for a minute, understand why we do this. The result is what I call science education is mentioning. I've had children and now grandchildren. Nothing's changed, really, for the vast majority of science students in the United States. Here's from a 7th grade life sciences textbook. 800 pages, covers all of biology, 6 bold-faced words per page on average. Running through the cell is a network of flat channels called the endoplasmic reticulum. That's a bold word. This organelle manufactures, stores, and transports materials. Then there's the next sentence is about the Golgi apparatus, another bold word, and so on. I love the Golgi apparatus, and I love the endoplasmic reticulum. I write textbooks about them, but it's not appropriate to even think about these things for these kids. And I didn't learn about them until I was in graduate school, in fact. But here's a trivial test. From the chapter self-test, write a sentence that uses the term endoplasmic reticulum correctly. So what are we telling kids about what science is or what science education is? And why are we surprised when they don't like it and they think it's useless? As you know, polls, Public Agenda did this series of different polls of both parents and students. And not only parents, but students didn't think it was, their science education on average was worth anything. Here's a current example of the 5th grade sample test. You can find this on our website in the wonderful state of California. This is what high-stakes testing that we're driving teachers to teach you. A scientist needs to take a picture of the well-ordered arrangements of the atoms and molecules within a substance. Which of the following instruments would be best for the scientist to use? And they give 4 choices. Unfortunately, first of all, none of them are right. But even if there was a right answer, I think the person who wrote it thought it was an electron microscope. It's not science. This has nothing to, why would you want kids to know this? It has nothing to do with, it sounds more like a fraternity initiation or a way of trying to sabotage the entire scientific enterprise of the United States. That's another way of looking at it. So an important challenge of the No Child Left Behind Act is that, as you know, high-stakes science assessments are now required in every state. It's much easier to test for science words than for science understanding and abilities, and bad tests are forcing a trivialization of science education, and it's driving most students, including many potential scientists, away from science. And so we need to change the tests. I'm not against accountability, but if you don't invest in good tests, then accountability is worthless. We could get higher and higher test scores and worse education. To make a big difference in science education in the United States, however, science education at the college level must change. And I didn't recognize, this is part of my education in Washington. Any large-scale change at lower levels will require major changes in the introductory science courses at colleges and universities. And the answer is, the reason is obvious, because what we do at major universities for Biology 1, for example, in my field, that's what parents and future teachers describe as biology education. So if we have all the kids, as we do in most places, cover all biology 1 year, memorize lots of things without any understanding, then the lower level courses will copy it. AP exams will be like that, high school exams, and that is the reason for that junior high school textbook. It's basically a condensed version of the college textbook. So it's also, if we want teachers to teach science as inquiry who've never had any inquiry themselves, it's not going to work. So we need to get inquiry into science education at the first year, second year college level. So the NSF has worked a lot on this. When I was here, you published a wonderful report. We published this report as a partner, Transforming Undergraduate Science Education, so on. Wonderful visions. No faculty member pays attention. They don't, not only don't they read reports, but if you force them to read it, they wouldn't believe it. So what we finally did was set up a summer workshop for teams of Biology 1 teachers at University of Wisconsin. Initially we used our own academy funds, but now it's supported by the Howard Hughes Medical Institute. And that is working. We're bringing, we bring a team of Biology 1 teachers from our Research 1 university and have them spend a week with other people excited about teaching and learning new ways of thinking about teaching. And that is having an effect, finally. I attended one of those sessions. Here I am learning to use clickers. And because of this workshop, I used clickers for the medical students this year. It was the first time I've been using in medical school, at least the beginning medical school classes. And it was fun. So my message for professors is this. In my opinion, the primary aim of any undergraduate introductory science course, whether in biology, chemistry, physics, or earth sciences, should be to enable students to appreciate and participate in science as a special way of knowing about the world. Many of you probably remember John A. Moore, who had the Science as a Way of Knowing project for the American Society of Zoology. It went on for about 10 years. He was a very articulate force in science education. Our goal as teachers and educators should be to expose our students to the discovery process and to excite them about the challenges at the frontiers of knowledge. We should try to make students understand why it's crucial that any scientific result can be confirmed by other scientists, and understand why a scientist can never be sure that he or she has the final answer about anything. This is not the way professors generally think about what they're doing when they're teaching Biology 1 today, but it should be. So I would like to end by talking about what I call making a science out of education, something that the Academy worked a lot on. The goal is to use knowledge of what increases student learning based on scientifically obtained evidence to create a continuously improving education system at all levels. Obviously, everybody believes in that. The Academy's first attempt to harvest what we know for schools was this book called How People Learn, Brain, Mind, Experience in School. And it's been, I think, widely effective in making people rethink their teaching and creating a new dialogue here about education. Some key points. Conceptual understanding is facilitated when new knowledge is structured around major concepts and principles. So that endoplasmic reticulum, there was no concept, just memorizing a term. I would teach, by the way, middle school cell biology without any of those words. I wouldn't use the standard words that you use even in high school. I'd just say the words get in the way, memorizing the words. I would talk about the fundamental concepts. Students' preconceptions must be engaged in order to construct new understandings. There's been a lot of work sponsored by the NSF that shows this. Learners have different strategies, ability sets, and learning styles for gaining comprehension, so we have to give them a mixture of ways of learning. And of course, I think most importantly, learners' motivation affects what is learned. And there's no motivation for memorizing endoplasmic reticulum and spitting it back on an exam. I mean, the only kids who probably be willing to do that with any motivation are those with parents who say, you know, get over this, it's horrible and stupid, but you'll get in a good college if you do it. And for most people, especially those people we like to empower who don't have those kinds of parents, this is not going to work. We then produced this set of booklets especially for teachers called How Students Learn, based on how people learn. And one of them, of course, is science in the classroom. Another one is mathematics in the classroom. Then we concluded, after all that work, that we need a much more focused and effective system of education research. We know some things. Those are the things we distilled in those volumes, but we don't know a lot of other things. Much of the new research must be focused on the classroom, building from what our best teachers already know. We need to respect these professionals. And otherwise, we'll continue exactly where we are with crazy magic bullets being introduced by each new superintendent who comes into a school district. Our recipe for effective education research, the result of two successive committees, is something called the Strategic Education Research Partnership. This was the second report, which was published in 2003. And the study committee for this was, again, the best committees in the academies are always a mixture of different kinds of people, just like the innovation, random collision of ideas. It's critical to get different viewpoints. And we had CEOs of corporations, we had superintendents of schools, leading researchers, and so on, teachers. And two big questions were posed. Why has research supported innovation and continuous improvement in medicine, agriculture, and transportation, but not in education? And second of all, what can we do about it? And here's the answer that these committees came up with. Education is missing two critical components. First of all, field sites, places where researchers, practitioners, and designers work in practice settings and can easily get access to data on students and so on. There's a big barrier to working in school districts because of all the paperwork you have to do. So we have to set up field sites where it's easy to come and do research. And we're supposed to be doing here what's called use-inspired research and development. The problems are defined by the school district, so they're real problems, and they're addressed in real-world settings. And also missing is some coordinating capacity. Here the important thing is a long-term collaboration, long-term knowledge accumulation and diffusion across the United States, and tries to actually replicate promising work in different settings to show that they work in the schools. So SERP was established as a new non-government organization in 2004. The Academies had a history of spinning out organizations from reports because the Academy doesn't want to be an actor in the system because then it can't be a judge, it can't be an evaluator. So we have a sort of a tradition of if it's a really good idea, we'll encourage the formation of a separate organization. The executive director is Suzanne Donovan, terrific staff officer, former staff officer at the Academy, who worked on all those how people learn and how students learn reports. And the plan is to create a set of research field sites, perhaps 12 at maturity, different kinds of settings. We started by targeting major research centers, and secondly, to develop an executive office with unique coordinating capacity, but it's small, very small executive office. Most of the work is done out in field sites. We've been learning as we've been going. It's fun to look back at that 2003 report. That was a guess of how this thing might work. But one of the problems that I have with federal policy and anything done by the government is it's always got to be right the first time, right? As a scientist, we know all these things we're trying to deal with are complicated. And my way of thinking about it, we got to do an experiment and start with a certain way of doing it, but be flexible and adjust as learning as we go. So that's one of the problems we've had with No Child Left Behind. It's got to be right because politicians are invested in it. This is no way to run society. So SERP has been changing as we've been going and learning. And we've learned that 3 distinct subgroups are needed in a field site. First, a core group. These are the superintendent and high-ranking people, both on the research side and the school district side, who meet for a few hours each month to set priorities and steer projects. But then there's a very important group called the design group. These are the district curriculum leaders plus cross-disciplinary experts from across the United States. These people are all serving as unpaid volunteers by Academy tradition. Professors from everywhere. They reshape the problem definitions posed by the school district and generate ideas from problem solving. And I'll show you a picture of a design group meeting in San Francisco in a second. Actually, it's a wonderful environment where you have a mixture of cultures with everybody learning something. And of course, the research team, which is local, led by university faculty, includes postdocs and graduate students, many working full-time on the project, and these people have to be paid. There's a big emphasis, however, on harvesting teacher knowledge. So the first 2 field sites are Boston, where the school district, led by Tom Pezant, chose middle school literacy as the major issue for them. Kids get to high school, they can't read textbooks, they're automatically going to drop out, fail. And then a field site in number 2 was San Francisco, where the current focus is middle school math and science. Again, chosen by the district as what they wanted to work on. This is a picture of about a third of the people in the room for a design team meeting in San Francisco, and you have a mixture of professors, graduate students, district curriculum leaders, and the environment's fantastic. These are all-day meetings followed by dinner, and they occur every few months. Just a terrific environment. So the next project in San Francisco, I hope, and we're talking about this now, is to see if we can make science education even more important than it has been. The city has a set of elementary schools, like all other cities, that have long failed to produce children who are successful. These are now being penalized in special status and No Child Left Behind and highlighted. That's a good feature of No Child Left Behind. We are highlighting our failures and forcing people to do something about it. So the question is, can we take some of these schools and center the entire curriculum on inquiry-based active science learning and spin off literacy from that? Now, the kind of science we're talking about, there's a tremendous amount of writing and reading. I remember when I was a student, my writing classes were, I was terrible. I do a lot of writing now, but when I was a student, I was supposed to make up a story. It was, I guess you call it creative writing. And I have no imagination. I kept on making up Little Red Riding Hood over and over again. It's just, yet the real kind of writing that's important is the kind of writing you do in science class. You're trying to explain something to somebody else, to analyze something. And so the key, I think, to making science education have the impact that it should have is to tie it very strongly to literacy and focus on that tie, because that's very meaningful to teachers and parents. So how would this new curriculum affect student motivation to learn? I think they'd be excited to do this kind of stuff. We know that they are when it's done well. They're actually doing something instead of sitting there listening to the teacher. And how would it, most importantly, affect their reading, writing, and math skills? And because it's a SERP project, the important thing is here that we have to put a lot of effort into researching what happens and why. If this is, what didn't work and what will we do different next time? This is something we almost never do. And what works and why does it work and in what conditions does it work? Tom Pizant is no longer superintendent of schools in Boston. SERP has survived both in Boston and San Francisco. It changed the superintendents, which is a good sign. Tom is pictured here because he's a member of the board of SERP now, a very effective person. I've been very discouraged that many older people seem to have given up on our public schools. And this is impossible. So, it's like giving up on life. The United States, if we have any advantages, and I think we do have advantages, it's our unique ability to integrate immigrants and more generally to select for talent wherever it lies. And this is done really only in our public schools. Outstanding public schools with opportunities for all are therefore absolutely critical to our future success as a nation. So I'm very pleased. I was on the national board for a while, Teach for America, when it was being criticized. I think it's just wonderful to get these young people working on these problems. And the value of Teach for America is being demonstrated by their 12,000 alumni, one of whom is superintendent of schools in Washington. Look at that imaginative plan they now have for paying teachers in a different way. I mean, it's young people who we need to get involved here. And my enthusiasm for this is long-lasting. It comes from when I was a senior at Harvard, 1959 or 60, and 10 of us got to eat dinner in our house with Chester Bowles. Chester Bowles was first a great man. He was first a very successful businessman, and then went to do public service. He was governor of Connecticut. He was ambassador to India, was deputy secretary of state, all kinds of things. And I caught him, this meeting with him was just after he had been ambassador to India and had run, I think, for Congress unsuccessfully, but would go on to work at the state. But anyway, so this was the height of the Cold War. We all thought we'd be dead from atomic explosion. Everybody was building concrete bunkers, and television was all advertising these things. You build these little things in your backyard and stock them up with 2 weeks of supply for the next atomic blast. So all those who are old as I will remember this. And I guess we were all 18 or something. Anyway, we were obsessed by this, and just kept on pressing him. How are we ever going to get out of this mess? The world's going to end. And here's his answer. Find the most capable young people you can who believe in the possibility of progress. Give them the responsibility and all the tools they need to work the problem. As soon as they start to lose hope, to think that there may be no way out, replace them with a new group of young people who are certain that progress is possible. Do the same thing again when these people need replacing, continuing an intense effort until the problem is solved. That's a very wise, we all know you can't succeed unless you believe you can succeed. And at any rate, I thought this has sort of shaped my attitude for a long time. An even older lesson is from Alfred North Whitehead about 90 years ago. The art of education is never easy. To surmount its difficulties, especially those of elementary education, is a task worthy of the highest genius. But when one considers the importance of this question of the education of a nation's young, the broken lives, the defeated hopes, the national failures which result from the frivolous inertia with which it's treated, it is difficult to restrain within oneself a savage rage. In the conditions of modern life, the rule is absolute. A country that does not value trained intelligence is doomed. And I think this is a very motivating factor should be for us all. So in summary, science education should have a much larger role in all school systems, but only if the science education is of a different kind than is experienced in most schools today. Secondly, making such a change will require major changes in the way that college science professors teach their introductory science classes. And this change should be of central concern to all scientists. And finally, to create continually improving education systems, we will need much more collaborative, effective, and use-inspired education research. Research that is focused on real school needs and that integrates our best school teachers into the work. Thank you.